Despite the Carolina Hurricanes losing 2-1 to open up the preseason, there are some takeaways to come from the game. Mainly Logan Stankoven kind of standing out as the 2C. Charles looked pretty good as well, and also Cayden Primeau kind of showed why the Carolina Hurricanes traded and then signed him for the upcoming season. And we also get to hear Rod Brind'Amour talk about said Cayden Primeau after his first game with the Canes. All of that on the Tuesday edition of Locked On Hurricanes.
You're Locked On Hurricanes, your daily podcast on the Carolina Hurricanes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Tuesday edition of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thank you to the Everyday for making this your first listen of the day, 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, talking everything about your Carolina Hurricanes. I'm your host, Zach Martin. I'm the credentialed Carolina Hurricanes beat writer over at the Hockey Writers, also the co-host of the Searchcast, which is a weekly Carolina Hurricanes podcast, along with all my duties here at Locked On Hurricanes. Like I said at the top of the show, we are going to have an interesting Tuesday edition of the pod as we get to kind of recap the preseason opener for the Hurricanes after losing 2-1 to the Tampa Bay Lightning. Like I said, there were some takeaways from it. It was a very chaotic preseason game and definitely showed it was a preseason game for sure. But also, Logan Stankoven's kind of making a case why he should be a center this upcoming season, and we do get to hear from Rod Brind'Amour. If you are watching on the YouTube version, you see my background is a little bit different than usual because I was able to travel to Raleigh, stayed overnight before heading back home. So that's why if it looks a little bit different compared to my usual setup, is because I'm in Raleigh. I'm not at home. That's just the life of being a beat writer that lives 3.5 hours away and is able to come up here. But the preseason game for the Canes against Tampa, you could definitely tell early on it was a preseason game where 85% of the roster are AHL guys and PTO players with a sprinkle of the NHL regulars. Kind of having to get used to the flow of the game, getting used to the system a little bit more, and just being back in game action really for the first time, not in a prospect showcase. Now it's like, okay, now you go against other guys from the other team that aren't just prospects, because Tampa did bring some veteran guys with them too, but a lot of their own AHL guys. And it was, one of those things where you really can't put a lot of stock in, special teams or how the team plays, because let's be honest, most of the roster isn't going to be there on opening night. So try to take everything with a little bit of a grain of salt. I know a lot of people were kind of frustrated early on with the power play, but it's, like I said, 90% of those guys aren't even going to be on the roster come opening night. And you kind of got to see some combination of the NHL regulars really there, but this game pretty much had everything. You're talking brouhahas, you're talking multiple game misconducts. Like, it was the refs in the third period, the refs just won. They completely lost the game. And it seemed like every time there was a scuffle, someone's getting ejected. Like, Tyson Jost gets boarded, he gets hot, which makes sense because can't blame the guy. And then he, gets into a little scuffle. Then he gets a 10 misconduct for just sticking up for himself. Giovanni Smith cross-checks one of the Tampa Bay Lightning guys, gets in a scuffle with him. Both of those guys leave, and he gets a 2-minute misconduct for the cross-check. And that's following him, actually getting into a fight with Connor Geekie after kneeing him, and then all of that happens. So he gets a 2 for kneeing and a 5 for fighting. So he gets like 19 minutes of penalties, which is just crazy to see in a preseason game, especially for the first one of, just games that don't really count. And then, of course, with, Tampa, they had a couple goals. Nothing really Cayden Primeau could do. He outside of the 2 goals that went in, which were upper 90 off the bar, and then a tip in with traffic in front, he did play pretty well, all things considered, stopping 17 and 19 shots. But just unfortunately, the Canes really couldn't get a lot going offensively. They did score a goal early in the third period, thanks to Kevin LeBanc. However, and I agree with Ryan Henkel on this, if you're throwing a coach's challenge in a preseason game, you should lose $1 million off the cap, or you should be fined for something, because Tampa is like, you know what, that was offsides. We want you to check it out. And then apparently Tyson Jost was a little bit offsides, and they called the goal back in a preseason game. Like, that's what I'm saying. This is just one of those games where it's preseason for everyone, and it just had everything. Like I said, you had some brouhahas, you got some scuffles, goals that were called back, just misconduct all over the place. It was just weird. It was a weird game, and like I said, there's no reason at all to call a coach's challenge in a preseason where the game doesn't matter. No points are going to be awarded. Like, why do that? Like, it just doesn't make any sense. So, unfortunately, one of the goals did get called off. Carolina does eventually score again on their one of at least their 6 or 7 power. They had a lot of power plays that night. Thanks to Logan Stankoven with the tip in off of Kevin Labanc goal. So Kevin Labanc could have had 2 points. 2 points. I put that in air quotes for preseason, but unfortunately didn't work out. But he did get the assist on the Stankoven goal on a tip in. Got the Hurricanes within 1. Alexander Keishan got the secondary assist. That was pretty much the only goal that counted. At least they weren't trying to challenge for that too. But it is what it is. I mean, overall, if you're looking at standouts, I mean, Charles Alexis Legault looked really good for how big that kid is at 6'4", 215. Alexander Keishan threw a massive hit in the middle of that game and basically had his presence felt in the second period really well. Jackson Blake had a lot of good chances, led the team in shots for the game. He had at least like 3 or 4 doorstep goals, but honestly, Hansen said, no, not really. We're not going to do that. Like I said, Stankoven did score a goal. Like I said, Cayden Primeau absolutely just went wonder kid in this game, making ridiculous saves left and right. There was a cross crease right to left. He goes over there. It was a one-time. He just flashes the glove and absolutely steals a goal, essentially. Basically, grand larceny. Someone called 911 on that guy. That was just absolutely bonkers how he was able to just explode from the right side to the left side. And of course, media asked him after the game, and he was just like, yeah, it was just a slap shot. I was able just to get over there and just throw my hand up and stop the puck. And that's just, goes to show that, hey, just instincts in the right time. And he proved why the Hurricanes, like I said, traded for him, for this season after winning 20-plus games with the Vol Rocket last year in the American Hockey League. So, like I said, outside of the 2 goals that weren't really on him, he played well as the game went along. So I'm very excited to see what he can do with the Chicago Wolves this upcoming season. It's definitely makes you feel good if you're a Hurricanes fan, knowing that he is your 3rd-string goalie going into the season in case anything happens. Not going to win, nothing does, but you do feel good about it. Other than that, it was just, like I said, it's a preseason game that doesn't matter. Points, power plays, all that stuff. Yeah, you're trying to figure some stuff out. You're trying to see where guys are at. These aren't games where it's like, oh, if you play well, you're going to make the team. It's like most of the roster's kind of locked up, and then you're trying to see where everyone's at with their development at this point, and getting some PTO guys a chance, some opportunities to see what they can do if they can bring something to the team. So, like I said, most of the roster is AHL guys and PTO guys with like maybe 4 of the NHL regulars. Even with the NHL regulars, I think the fact that the Keishan stood out really well with some big hits and some big plays. Jackson Blake led the team in shots for the most part. He did really well, had a lot of good opportunities, to score, even set up his teammates as well. Logan Stankoven did score a goal. Taylor Hall did okay. Definitely tried to get ahead of the puck a little bit and kind of mistimed a lot of rushes that led to turnovers. But, I mean, it's the first preseason game for a lot of these guys. It's first game action for a lot of them too, outside of a training camp. So I'm not really too worried about it. It's preseason. It doesn't matter. It's just, seeing where everyone's at, getting everyone kind of, built up as we go along. But like I said, standouts, I definitely say even Dominic Fensori looked really good. He had some great opportunities. So I'm excited to see what he can do as well for Chicago. So I'd say like early standouts, Cayden Primeau, Charles Alexis Legault, Dominic Fensori, Blaker, Stankoven. Those guys kind of really showed out in Keishan. So there is, like I said, there are some positives that comes from this game despite losing 2-1 in a preseason opener. But like I said, it's preseason. Doesn't matter. at least we have some Hurricanes hockey back in some aspect. Now, talking about Logan Stankoven, I did talk to Jackson Blake earlier in the day on Monday, and he did mention about Stankoven being a center. And after the game on Monday night, it kind of makes sense why there is a sense that maybe he should be a center this upcoming season. Why? I'll tell you why here in a second on a Tuesday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel's making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. It makes every game more exciting, whether you're watching your team or just keeping an eye on your fantasy lineup. It's quick, easy, and the best way to add a little more energy to your Sundays. Maybe you're watching the Panthers, the Chargers, the Buccaneers, Eagles, whoever. There is a lot of way to boost your Sundays by playing with, on FanDuel. So, are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. Welcome back to segment 2 of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day. So like I said, I talked to Jackson Blake one-on-one after the morning skate, getting his thoughts overall with his mindset, going into the season 2 with the team doesn't have to worry about making the team now, just trying to get better. And did talk about, some early takeaways from camp being with Andrei Svechnikov and Logan Stankoven. Now, he did say last year didn't really play with Stankoven because they were both wingers at the time, but did have some time with Svech and also time with Sebastian Aho as well. But he did say this about Logan Stankoven. He thinks that he would be really good as a center for the team. He thinks he's really good at that position, and it does say a lot hearing it from a teammate who plays on the line with him currently through four train camp practices before we get to preseason games. So it's interesting to hear that coming from Blake or after the fact that him and Stankoven both got their extensions for 8 years this past summer. So these guys are both signed through the same year, 33, 33, 34. But it's good to hear just the fact that it's coming from a teammate and someone who's excited to kind of play with them as a center. In Stankoven. I think the fact that when you look at Stankoven, he had a 56.3% faceoff percentage as the first line center. And Rod Brind'Amour said it too. It's kind of tough to gauge how he did with so many penalties. You're kind of have to go on the power play, PK a lot. So didn't really get a good sample size, a sample size that they would prefer to have when assessing how he is as a center. But overall, for the most part, he did really well. I think he had some great opportunities to set up his teammates, with Hall and Blake, more so Blake than Hall. Had some opportunities himself to score, and he did score with some net front presence on the power play to make it a 2-1 game. Like I said, 56.3%, that's pretty dang good, all things considered, when you look at the Carolina Hurricanes and the centers they have with Sebastian Aho, Jesperi Kotkaniemi and Jordan Staal. Those guys are always 50% or more every season, it seems like, when it comes to the faceoffs. Even Kotkaniemi, ever since coming to Carolina, he's been over 50%. Before with the Canadians, he was never over 50% in the faceoffs, and since coming over to Carolina, he's been over 50% every time. So you kind of have a sense that the Hurricanes are doing something right when it comes to faceoffs, especially for the fact that they always have the possession. They have a lot of shots. Their Corsi scores are through the roof. Of course, it helps when you have Jordan Staal, one of the toughest guys to be in the faceoff. Sebastian Aho is probably going to go down as one of the top Hurricanes players of all time at the pace that he's at right now. And it also helps, too, that your head coach won back-to-back Selkies for the fact that he was a really good face-off man himself. So it makes sense when you look at Logan Stankoven, and he kind of did the same thing, just winning face-offs, winning board battles, possession of the puck, setting up his teammates, trying to score himself. Yes, it's a small sample size. Yes, it wasn't enough of a sample size to see where he's at right now as a center in kind of a AHL type of roster that he went up against. But it makes you feel good that, okay, maybe there is something to be said about Stankoven maybe being a center for the Carolina Hurricanes. Could it be 2C? Possibly, because that's where he's been kind of at right now through training camp, and he was the first-line center for the team on Monday night. So if the Hurricanes feel like, hey, we needed a right shot center, no one's really giving these guys up right now. We have Jarvis who's done it before. Stankoven's done it more recently, and he did pretty well in his first game. And if he keeps that up through the rest of preseason and training camp, I would tend to believe it makes sense to maybe move him over to the center. Then you're looking at Svetch and Blake on your second line. That's a pretty good second line, all things considered. When you look at it, it's probably Ehlers, Aho, Jarvis as your top line. And then you got Svetch, the power forward. Then you got Stankoven as your right shot center. Then you got Jackson Blake, who's looking poised to take a step in his game in his sophomore season. That's a pretty good top six to have, all things considered, where you have a lot of young guys, but a lot of great talent. And you got some guys who are, 25, upper 20s, like that, who still have a lot of left in the gas tank themselves and who can produce and score goals and stuff. So I think that'd be a great top six to have. Then you're probably looking at the Jordans, William Carrier is your third line. Of course, don't number the lines if you're running Rod Brind'Amour. But that's what Robinson, Kotkaniemi, Hall as your fourth line. That's not a bad fourth line to have, really, because you do have some speed. You got some scoring. You got some playmaking there as well. So that should be a very interesting fourth line if we're going to put it in air quotes because, like I said, don't number lines in front of Brind'Amour. But if you look at the top six, like I said, if it's Stankoven center with Blake and Svetch, that's a great second line to have to back up that first line of Ehlers, Jarvis, and Aho. Like I said, it would kind of alleviate or give you some sense of maybe we have figured out the second line center question that everyone's been asking. And it's a right shot. We really wanted him. He's locked up for the next 9 seasons, including this year. So, like I said, he did pretty well. I was watching him on the game on press row, and I thought he did pretty well as the center for the Carolina Hurricanes. Like I said, and I agree with Brind'Amour, it's a little bit hard to do that when there's so many penalties and you only do so much because of them being on special teams and everything else. But from what he saw, I thought he did pretty well, and I'm curious to see how he goes through the rest of training camp and even more of the preseason games because I think he deserves more opportunities to show that he can play center for the Hurricanes, and maybe he is their 2C situation that we can try to figure out. And 2, you're putting Blake in the top 6. You're not relegating him to a possible 3rd or 4th line because I think Jackson Blake has the talent to be a guy who can get 50 points a season. It's just giving him the right teammates and the right minutes and right opportunities to do that. And I think putting Blake in the top 6 for the whole season instead of starting him in the bottom 6 and then moving up later on, then moving down, then coming back up. If you put him in the top 6 right from the jump and you got your power forward and Svetch on the other side, who he has some chemistry with. He even said he thought he did pretty well when he played with Svetch last year. And now you have the playmaking, tough mentality of Logan Stankoven in the middle. There's a good possibility that second line could really be sneaky good this upcoming season for the Carolina Hurricanes. It puts a lot of pressure on teams because it's like, who do you really stop on your second line after you have to deal with the speed and the playmaking of your first line? So, like I said, it was a small sample size. It's still very early on the preseason and in training camp. But so far, Logan Stankoven's looked pretty good as a center for the Carolina Hurricanes. And if that's the direction they go down where it's like, hey, he kind of showed that he can play center and we're going to run with him and see where it goes from there, I think a lot of Hurricanes fans will be happy with the fact that, okay, Stankoven kind of proved it. We found our right shot center. He plays like a Carolina Hurricane, and it gives other guys like Blake an opportunity to play in the top 6 and not be kind of shuffled out in the lineup. Then, hey, there you go. Then maybe the 2C situation has been figured out after Hall, and he had to go internal. And he didn't have to go and trade for someone and stuff like that. So it should be interesting as the training camps and preseason goes along. But so far, in my opinion, I think Stankoven's did a pretty good job, and I think he's slowly starting to make that case why he should be the second-line center for the Carolina Hurricanes because he's done it before with the Dallas Stars and the Texas Stars, and even back at Kamloops in the Western Hockey League. So it should be interesting over the next few days, couple weeks, see where it goes from there. Now, we are going to listen to Rod Brind'Amour's press conference following that game loss against the Tampa Bay Lightning. So stick around and we'll listen and give some thoughts on that here in a second on a Tuesday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you could end up leaving money on the table. That's why there's Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or on your phone. Monarch is built for people with busy lives. If you put off organizing your finances, Monarch is for you. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. You can identify that you aren't saving as much as you thought with Monarch, which it helps you notice an insufficient investment allocation and discover forgotten 401ks from your past jobs. So don't let the financial opportunity slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with the code LOCKEDONNHL. Welcome back to segment 3 of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day. Now, after the Carolina Hurricanes 2-1 loss to Tampa Bay Lightning, media was able to ask Rod Brind'Amour some questions following the game, talking about just Logan Stankoven, the team overall, and even where I was even able to ask him about Cayden Primeau in his first game and assess his overall progression through the game in his first time with the Carolina Hurricanes. So without further ado, let's jump into that with Rod Brind'Amour right now.
Rod, we all know what these games are about. Just your overall assessment of the guys, and particularly, I thought Nikishin looked like he
has moments, right? Like he's definitely a super talented player, and then, like I said, once he really understands what's going on, like he's just getting on and buying talent right now and freewheeling it a little bit, which is great. But the little details that'll come in, I'll just once he really. I think that communication thing starts happening and it's a little more natural. I think he's just keep getting better and better.
Are you able to get a proper assessment of Logan at center in these games, or do you need a little more NHL competition to pair them against?
No, I mean, there's some of that, but, it's tough with all the penalties. So you really get no flow, and then you're looking. But I thought he did a good job. May as well, obviously. I mean, that line was pretty good. They just didn't score, 5-on-5, got one on the power play, but snapped it around pretty well, and I thought he looked good up the middle.
Throughout the game, it seemed like Cayden Primeau kind of started easing into his game and made some big saves. How would you assess him just game one?
Yeah, I thought he was really solid too. I mean, their goalie played a great game and kept them in the game, but there was a point where, Cayden made a couple of saves to keep us in the game too, so I thought he did well.
I meant to ask you this afternoon and I forgot. I just wanted to ask about Bernie Perron. Obviously, you're Flyers legend, and I'm sure you had plenty of interactions with him.
Yeah, I sure did. It's tough. I mean, it's the tough part is you realize he's 80 years old for me, because it's like, wait a minute, I was 21 to 28 when he was around every day and it was a lot of fun, and just that's life, goes on. But he was one of those special people. I don't say players. I didn't know him as a player. I knew him after. So, it's tough to see.
Big thank you to Rod Brind'Amour of the Carolina Hurricanes, as always, for letting us be able to use the audio to hear from the coach and the players themselves as the preseason and the regular season goes along. So you kind of heard it, the fact that talking about Logan Stankoven real quick, it's hard to kind of assess how he was doing as a center because there were so many penalties. They really could do a lot of 5-on-5, so maybe a little bit more time over the next few preseason games. Maybe we can get a better assessment of where Stankoven is at when it comes to the 2C situation. You did hear Corey Lavalette ask about Alexander Nikishin, and Rod Brind'Amour said, there's going to be some details that he still needs to figure out, still kind of going off of talent that he really showed in the KHL. But, getting used to the system a little bit more, the details will come in there and stuff like that. And you heard me ask Rod about, Cayden Primeau, just, as the game went along, you kind of sensed that he was getting more into the game. Like I said, made some huge saves, and Brind'Amour even said it too. he made some very key saves, really some highway robbery-like saves to keep the Hurricanes in the game, because if it wasn't for Primeau making a lot of big stops when it was 1-0, 2-0, this game could have gotten away from the Hurricanes. They could have been down possibly 3-4-0 if it wasn't for Cayden Primeau. So, it felt like that Brind'Amour was happy with where Primeau was in his game as it progressed along and stuff like that. So, like I said, there are some positives to take away from this game, despite the fact it was a 2-1 loss. And it's also preseason, too, so you're kind of seeing where everyone's at this point. But, like I said, you did have some standouts. Nikishin looked good. Legault looked good as well. Fensore, I think he's been kind of, upping his game a lot, kind of putting himself into a good spot to make some noise. Maybe this upcoming season, of course, Stankoven, Blaker, all that. It gives you a good sense of where the Hurricanes are for the now and for the future when it comes to the team, because right now the prospect pool, according to Elite Prospects, is 14th in the NHL. So you're in a good spot for the Carolina Hurricanes for the fact that even with your prospects, you're 14th, and you're having a lot of picks in the later first rounds. Maybe you're trading out of the first round and getting a lot of second, third, and fourth, and you're still finding those gems there to put you in the 14th prospect pool according to EP. You're doing pretty well. And of course, that's all credit to Darren York and the amateur staff for finding those gems, and why you think the Hurricanes love to get their Russians, because a lot of teams are afraid to do it, but the Hurricanes aren't afraid to go get their Russian guys, and sprinkle in some of the European guys and the Americans as well, but and some Canadians. But overall, it's preseason. You lose 2-1. The game was very chaotic. It was a gong show essentially right from the rip. But all you can do is assess, have the day off on Tuesday or however they want to play it out with that. And then it's on to the community game on Wednesday against the Florida Panthers for the second game of the preseason. And then we just keep chugging along. And before you know it, we are going to be closer to the start of the NHL season. As of today on Tuesday, we are 16 days away from the start of the 25-26 season. It's creeping by ever so slowly. However, we are getting closer to the starting line of what Rod Brind'Amour calls the marathon stretch. And right now, everyone's just trying to find the seat on the bus to be part of that journey. Because he said it's 3 parts. It's the preseason. Everyone's trying to find the seat to get on the bus to be part of the marathon run, which is an 82-game season. Then we all know what the final stretch run is. Welcome to the playoffs. 16 wins means you win a cup. So it's, as of right now, it's, hey, show us why you belong on the bus. Show us why you want to be part of the journey and be part of the 25-26 Carolina Hurricanes. So it should be interesting over the next few days. Like I said, over the next 16 days at least. Another 5 preseason games to go. Got a lot of training camp games to go on as well. And then, we'll figure out who's on the roster and who's going to Chicago and who's probably going back to their other respective teams in their other leagues. So it should be interesting, but at least now we're actually going to talk about actual games, kind of having some takeaways from game action, even if it's, games don't count, but you still want to see where everyone's at in terms of that. But at least we're talking on ice product instead of just talking about what ifs and hypotheticals. So at least they're there with that. But guys, this will be the Tuesday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. Thank you for making your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NHL podcast, where there is no off season, bringing you the daily league light stories that matter the most, with local coverage you love from Locked On. Find Locked On NHL on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. If you want to keep up with me, I'm at OneTrueZach on X. The podcast is LO_Hurricanes. I'm also on Blue Sky, the Zachary Martin, where if you click the link tree in my bio, you can find all my written content at thehockeywriters.com. I've been putting out a lot of stuff recently. Just had a one-on-one sit-down with Jackson Blake after the morning skate with the game day group, so make sure to go check that out. Also did a recap about the game, and we're going to have a couple more things coming out from this game as well, so make sure to keep an eye out on thehockeywriters.com or on my socials to see where you can read all of that. If you want to check out my other podcasts, it's the Searchcast on all podcast platforms and on YouTube. For Locked On Hurricanes, we're on Spotify, Google, Apple, iHeartRadio, Wherever you listen to your podcast, make sure to leave a 5-star rating or review because I might just read it on the show. For YouTube, it's Locked On Hurricanes. Subscribe, hit the bell notifications so you don't miss the show. Hit the thumbs up to let me know if you like the show as well. Share with other Caniacs to become everydayers just like you. But hope everyone enjoyed the Tuesday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. Enjoy your Tuesday. And until next time, as always, let's go Canes.